Hi, this is Gene Monterastelli, the editor of TappingQA.com. As each day passes, autism is becoming more and more part of our daily life. If you don't have someone in your immediate family who's been diagnosed on the spectrum, more than likely you have a close friend or relative who has. Some statistics say that in the future, as many as 1 out of every 120 children born today are going to be diagnosed somewhere on the spectrum. And what's really frustrating is we still don't have a clear understanding of why it happens and the best way to treat it. But with that being said, tapping has been found to be a great tool for parents of children who have been diagnosed on the spectrum to care for themselves and as a way to provide care for their children themselves. In this interview with John Roedel, I talked to him about his experience in using tapping for him and his wife as they've managed having a son who's been diagnosed on the spectrum, and how they've used tapping to help to care for their son. This interview and over 100 more can be downloaded at tappingqa.com/podcast, and I hope you really enjoy this interview with John. Today I'm going to be interviewing John Roedel. I have known John and his wife for over 20 years, and their oldest son has been diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And so in this interview, what we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about what it's like being parent of a child who has been diagnosed with autism, because I think a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to have firsthand experience of what it's like to live with that. In the second half of the interview, we talk about how EFT has been beneficial not only for John and his wife in helping them to manage the emotions that they deal with, but also the amazing symptom relief that their son has seen through the use of EFT. So to start out with, I asked John, what's it like being the parent of a child who has been diagnosed on the autism spectrum?
Not to be really simple about it, but it is extremely difficult. It's a day-to-day struggle. It's a day-to-day, not just struggle in dealing with the many behaviors a child with autism has, or actions or quirks. It's a struggle in dealing with people's perceptions. It's a struggle in dealing with the school district. It's a struggle in dealing with outside, friends and family who don't quite understand why your child is the way they are. And then it's a struggle internally dealing with maybe some of the guilt that maybe you don't feel like you're doing enough for your child, or maybe the understanding of, did I bring this on somehow myself? So being a parent of an autistic child is extremely difficult. It is a day-to-day grind, and it's a day-to-day. You have to be very consistent with what you do and the therapies you do every day with your child. So it is difficult, but there are some good things about it as well. But my first answer to that would be it's extremely difficult.
And so, in some of those difficulties, what are some of the difficulties that the other kids in the family face?
Sure, we have two siblings. Our autistic child is 8 years old, and he has a 6-year-old brother and almost a 3-year-old brother. And the difficulties they face is he is the peer model for them. He is the older brother, so they can kind of see his behavior almost as a template. And for us to try to teach our other 2 younger children, okay, our autistic son can kind of get away with these things because he can't control himself. But for you two guys, we have maybe a different standard to hold you to. So for them, it's hard for them to model their behavior or not model their behavior after their older brother. And it's getting to the point now where they're starting to recognize, certainly our 6-year-old is, that his 8-year-old brother, there's something going on there that's not typical of what he sees with his other friends at school or even the kids in his brother's classroom. So he's starting to understand and ask difficult questions. And so some of the struggles, and some of their struggles are also identifying and building a relationship with their autistic brother, because obviously for people in the spectrum, that is one of the more difficult things to do, is to help build meaningful relationships with other people.
And so you mentioned at the beginning when you're talking about difficulty, you talked about difficulty explaining to friends and to family what it's like. What are some of those things that are really difficult for people who don't have someone in their life who is somewhere on the spectrum? What are some of those difficult things that you deal with that they may not see or understand?
Right. For example, to bringing our child over to maybe a relative he hasn't seen in a while, And one of our child's autistic behaviors, and this is typical of a lot of children with autism, is called stimming, where he cannot keep his hands still. Some autistic children do a lot of flapping with their hands. He just fidgets with his fingers a lot, or he'll have a little toy in his hand, and he can't keep himself still. We could hold his arms and try to keep him still that way, but it's very natural for him to be in motion. So just that typical behavior, going to a family member who maybe understands, he has autism but doesn't know what that means, to see him like that and be always in motion always seems to put people off in a way. They're not comfortable being in that kind of situation with a child who just cannot sit still. And so that's one of the more difficult things, is trying to explain to them this is just his behavior. It's not a bad behavior. It's not something that we punish. It's just something we live with. And for people who aren't with us all the time, they're, well, how can you live with that? How can, he can't sit still. He can't, stop fidgeting. He can't stop grabbing things or wanting to hug or things like that. They don't understand that that's not a bad behavior. That's just who he is. And so that's one of the difficulty things with friends and family. And it's more for people who we only see every now and then. People who are with us on a day-to-day basis have understood this is just natural for him. But explaining that to other people can sometimes be difficult.
There's the behavior and interacting with someone that folks don't have a great deal of experience with. What are some of the other struggles that you face that happen inside of the house that people just don't see, that the family deals with?
Sure. Emotion. I've heard people talk about, we've talked to various psychologists and things like that, say, well, one of the struggles with autistic children is you don't necessarily see emotion. And that's not our case at all. And that's not the case of a lot of autistic children I've met. Our son is very emotional. It can go from the dark sadness of something not going right, and that can be anything minor as, not coloring what he's working on. He's an artist. He really loves to draw, and if he messes something up, that can be devastating for him. Even if it's something he's doing in his free time just for fun, if he screws up a painting he's working on or something he's coloring, he is devastated to the point of, true heartbreak. And so you can have that low and that swing immediately within seconds, and then he can recover from that within a minute or two. And he can bounce between emotions, highs and lows, happy, sad, laughter, anger, within moments of one another. And for us, the difficulty for us is not to get drawn into where he's at in his particular emotion. If he's really angry and he's fighting with his brother and he cannot control his anger and he wants to hit his brother, it's hard for us not to remain calm and not to kind of join in the defensive of his brother and not get angry as well. Or when he's really happy, we can't follow him up there right away because in a moment or two he could be really sad again. So one of the struggles is for us, and I think for me, probably a lot of parents, maybe with a child similar on the spectrum, is to remain calm and even-keeled. And certainly for me, I'm kind of a neurotic fellow who goes from ups, kind of has ups and downs myself. Remaining calm at all times, regardless of the situation, is a struggle.
You'd mentioned at the beginning, not to just be a super downer about the whole thing, you talked about that there are some blessings as well, having this sort of experience in your family. What are some of the blessings that you have seen for yourself personally and for your family?
Absolutely. One of them specifically, and I kind of mentioned it with the things I saw as a negative, is every day is kind of a day-to-day battle. It's a grind. Well, and that same thing is, it kind of makes you look at each day for what it is. We don't really have a long-term, before we had children, we had a long-term view of what his life would be like. Okay, you have a child, they go to school, they meet friends, they get into sports, they go to prom, they get married, they start their life, then they have children. Well, with our family now, we kind of look at things as enjoying the day as it comes. It's not, we don't have a 5-6 year plan of, we want our child to be doing this in 6 years, or I want him to go to this college in 6-7 years. We kind of enjoy, I think, the moment more, because when the moments are good, it's so much different than when the moments are bad that we take notice. I think maybe had we not had this experience in our family, we might not notice the good times. They just might be there. In this case, we have some dark and hard times that when the good times are there, and when our son with autism is with us, man, those are great times, and we're able to be aware of them. So I think it's given me more of an appreciation for just being present in the day. So that's certainly a good thing. I think in a lot of ways it's drawn us closer together as a family, and I know in the next few months we're going to start helping our autistic son kind of identify with kind of what's going on with him. It's kind of been a secret to him that he has this diagnosis on him, but it's starting to become time, and it's natural. It seems like it's natural for us now to start explaining to the rest of our children, okay, this is what's going on with our son. This is what's going on with your brother. And I think when we start doing that, we're going to really come to our defense more and be tighter as a family. And I'm really planning on that carrying on when our children reach into their adolescence and teenage years, that they'll be close. And the three little boys will be close and defend one another and, be there for one another.
That's really awesome. What are some of the ways that you have been able to use EFT to find some symptom relief with your son?
That's a great question. It was 2 or 3 years ago, I believe, we started incorporating EFT into his life, and I'm not going to try to be melodramatic about this, but it's going to sound like it. The results were pretty amazing and pretty. Had someone told me what the outcome would have been beforehand, I would have said, "Well, you're lying," because there were some immediate things that started to happen. I remember we had worked with, and you had helped come up with some sensitivity things we tapped over, and you did that from your location. We did some on our end, and immediately at that point he was hardly reading, and this was when he was 4 or 5, hardly reading, really not speaking. He didn't even like books. Most of his communication dealt with screaming and pointing at things. He had his own made-up language that he had picked up from watching some cartoons. And this was when he was about 4. And within a measurable amount of time, weeks to months, there was a noticeable change in his language. There was a noticeable change in his behaviors. There was a noticeable change in his taking interest in actually becoming more cognitive. It was, my wife and I look back at that period of time and say, when EFT and we started tapping, and when you started tapping, it seemed like it was kind of when he started waking up, when his eyes, at least his cognitive eyes, started opening. And that was it was a pretty remarkable thing. And like I said, I don't think I would have believed it had I not seen it with my own eyes.
And so when you said you did some tapping for him, what specifically did you do? Like what did you do mechanically? Right. Did you tap on him? Did you surrogately tap for him? How often did you do it?
Right. We did both. We tried to make it a routine, and it started looser for me, but as time went on and as I started seeing the results, it became part of our nightly routine with him. I would tap surrogately every morning when I woke up. First I did it for myself, and then I would tap for my son. I would focus on maybe a couple words just for a week, and I focused on 2 words, 2 things that I knew he had sensitivity issues with, like metal, or a brand of detergent we were using at the time, or things like that, or fluorescent lights that I knew what he had. He hated fluorescent lights, so that was usually the one I thought of the moment in that morning. So I would tap every morning for him, and then at night, when we tucked him into bed, we'd read a story, and we'd pray, and then I would tap on him. At first, for the first month or so, it was just me doing it, and he just enjoyed the pressure on his, on his face and on his head and on his neckline. He really enjoyed that, and I don't know if he understood the words, but as time went on, he started doing it, with me. And I would find him during the course of the day, and he's sitting there, tapping on his temple or tapping on his brow. He would do it independently on his own. So it started out as structured, and now he kind of does it whenever he needs to. He kind of is able at the point now to identify his stresses and when he gets overstimulated, so he taps for himself now.
And have you guys talked about that at all? About those choices that he's making when he's doing that sort of thing?
We've tried to. He has a hard time with the abstract.
Okay.
He has a hard time figuring out why this works, but he knows it does work. He works with an art therapist that his two ways that she's helped him, figure out a good way for him to relieve stress is whenever he gets overstimulated or over emotional, over anxious, she's encouraged him to draw or create something. And he explained to her, but that's also what I do when I, tap on my face. So he understands that it works for him, that he needs to do it to help calm his heart, as he says. It's hard to explain to him, what the words mean or why we do it and things like that.
It's hard to explain to a lot of adults the exact same thing.
Right. Yes,
this is pretty mysterious sometimes, but that's great.
Right. Yeah, but he does do it independently, and he's starting to become to the point now where he's able to recognize his emotions and his mood and what his body needs. And so he does a lot of tapping on his palm.
That's great.
Yep.
And you had mentioned that when you had started and you were spending time in the morning surrogately tapping for him, you said that you had done it after you did tapping for yourself.
Right.
How have, as at the beginning we talked quite a bit about some of the obstacles that you guys face in your family. How have you used EFT for yourself as you have been trying to do this?
Yeah, like I had mentioned earlier, the stresses, just the emotion, the guilt. I would say we kind of went through a range of different emotions from diagnosis and through his first years. And it's hard. It's hard when you have a 4 or 5-year-old who cannot, who's not potty trained. It's hard when, you see your 4 or 5-year-old and you see them and compare them to another child their age. And, you feel sad when you see that. So I certainly had some issues to work with and some guilt and some sadness. And tapping really helped me take control. EFT helped me take control of what I was feeling, and it helps, I don't want to use the word medicate, but it helped deal with the symptoms. I was not sleeping well at night. I was consciously going through the day really stressed out and having knots in my stomach. And some of that was due to the, working with our child. Some of that was just natural doing with the stress of work I was in. But that's why I was more willing to work on it with my child, is because I saw the immediate benefits of how it affected my life. And how it affected my life was pretty immediate.
So in addition to the symptoms, the physiological symptoms that come along with stress, what are some of the emotions you think that parents of any sort, but particularly parents of special needs children, really need to tune into as they're trying to take care of their own mental well-being while they're caring for their family?
Yeah. Obviously stress, obviously irritability. That was the one thing. I'm a pretty easygoing fellow, and I didn't notice this little pot had been stewing for a while, but I was becoming very short-tempered, and not in a violent way, but just in just a pessimistic, dismissive way. I was always grouchy. I was always, angry at somebody or something. So certainly anger and irritability are one. Defensiveness. No one was going to understand what our family was going through, so why even bother explaining it to somebody? A sense of not really having hope, and, hope for progress in our child, hope for progress in ourselves, because our lives had become paralyzed at that point. Every day was about trying to find something new for our child, or helping our child to at least try to learn to, walk correctly, or, deal with, just something a normal child's supposed to pick up on their own. And we were getting so enveloped in all those little battles that we kind of lost touch with, our own dreams and our own goals and aspirations. So I would say anger, irritability, hopelessness, and defensiveness were the ones that we keyed on early. Guilt is a big one. And it's one that is, we gave our own dose of medicine. We never had a doctor tell us, okay, this is your fault because of what you did while, your wife was pregnant, or what you did when he was a child, and certainly my poor wife who, carried him in her womb, she had a sense of guilt. Well, what did I do wrong? Did I not eat well? Did I carry something in the gene pool that I didn't know was there? There's, a lot of things that we just brought upon ourselves. And, you know, no one ever told us to feel guilty about it, but you naturally do. And it's hard for someone to tell you, don't feel guilty, it's not your fault. Well, I mean, it's hard not to when it's your child. It's hard not to when you had a vision of your child someday being able to live his own life, you know, when, you know, at one point we weren't sure he would ever be able to live independently or ever be able to have friends or ever be able to fall in love or understand, you know, what it meant to have dreams or goals. And so there's this humongous sense of guilt because you can't control it, and he's your child and you want to protect him, but you can't protect him from it. So guilt was a major one, and it's still present, but it's one that I think using EFT has helped gain some perspective. And now that we're able to kind of look at, you know, the progress he's made and the journey he's taking, our guilt is manageable.
So what advice would you give to a parent who is found themselves in a circumstance where all of a sudden there's this whole new world for them, and
Right.
and their lives changed because they were expecting one thing and they now have a new path to walk? What would be your recommendation, advice for someone at the beginning of that circumstance?
Sure. My advice is, if someone like me, and I'm a guy who's afraid of clowns and afraid of bees. You know, if I see a bee and I'm mowing the lawn, I will stop mowing the lawn and run inside for 3 weeks. I'm a pretty neurotic, kind of schleppy guy. If someone like me can handle this, then anyone can. If someone like me can become a stronger person, because at first I didn't think I was going to be strong enough to deal with raising a special needs child. But the strength is there. And the way you find that strength in your life is you have to take care of yourself first. And that sounds selfish, and I don't mean it to sound selfish. I mean it to sound like you have to be able to make sure you're dealing with your stress and your emotions and your sense of helplessness. You have to deal with those first before you can fully be present for your child, because they're going to need you. They're going to need you 23 hours of the day to be the guardian standing by them. But you have to find a way during the course of your day, even for a small moment, to help take care of your own self. Because if you're a wreck and you're not together, then how can you be there for your special needs child when you have to go to a meeting at the school and it's going to be confrontational, or you have to deal with the aunt who's going to say something snide about your child, or you're going to have to deal with strange looks from people in Target. You need to be strong. In order to do that, you have to help take care of yourself, you know, through diet, through EFT, through a range of things that might just fit you personally. I learned to start taking daily walks, and that has helped immensely. You know, remaining who you are despite the storm you're in. I guess that would be the best advice I could give.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd want to add?
Sure. I think I would add to be open-minded into different therapies for your child or the person you're caring for. When we first started our journey with our child with autism, some of the things that we're doing now seem inconceivable. We have such a crazy diet for him. That I would have thought a few years ago, that's impossible. You know, how can our family deal with a diet like that? It's worked wonders. You know, years ago, had I thought tapping, you know, would have been a major key in our battle with autism? No, but it's worked. And we found other therapies and other things like that have worked, that were out of the box. And I would just encourage people to not dismiss things just because they sound crazy, new agey, or, you know, whatever. Do research, experiment, try different things, talk to other parents. Don't isolate yourself, but keep an open mind. That'd be the only thing I would leave with.
Cool. Thanks, John.
Yep.